My first impression of Daniel was that he looked way too relaxed for someone who had just ruined my morning. Not because he did anything terrible, just because he walked into the biochemistry lab 10 minutes late, coffee in one hand, backpack hanging from one shoulder, and somehow managed to smile at the professor like they were old friends. Meanwhile, I'd been sitting there since 8 in the morning, triple-checking my notebook, color-coding my lab schedule, and trying not to think about the fact that this course was worth almost half my semester grade. I wasn't naturally organized. I was terrified. There was a difference. Since Mr. Brooks has finally decided to join us, Professor Hayes said dryly, we can assign lab partners. Daniel gave an apologetic grin that somehow made half the room laugh. I rolled my eyes. People like him always got away with everything. The professor started reading names alphabetically, pairing students one after another. Every pair would stay together for the entire semester. Weekly experiments, shared reports, midterm practical, final project. Basically, your partner could either save your GPA or destroy it. I silently prayed for someone reliable. Ellis Carter. I raised my hand. Daniel Brooks. I froze. Daniel looked around before realizing he was supposed to come over to my station. Looks like we're together, he said with an easy smile. I nodded politely. Guess so. He put his coffee down beside my perfectly arranged notes. I should probably warn you. I looked up. I'm terrible at chemistry. Wonderful. Just wonderful. The first experiment lasted almost 3 hours. Within the first 20 minutes, Daniel had already managed to misread the instructions, almost grab the wrong reagent, forget to put on his safety goggles, and somehow nearly label 2 completely different samples with the same code. Every single time I caught the mistake before it became a disaster. By the end of the session, I felt like I'd aged 5 years. I'm sorry, Daniel admitted while we cleaned the glassware. I know I'm slowing you down. I wanted to say, you're slowing me down? Instead, I took a breath. It's fine. It isn't. He scratched the back of his neck. I transferred here this semester. That caught my attention. I didn't know. Different university. What happened? He shrugged. My parents moved. He said it so casually that I couldn't tell whether it actually bothered him. I lost almost all my credits. Ouch. Yeah. For the first time, he didn't smile. I have to pass everything. That sounded familiar. Too familiar. Outside the lab, we naturally walked toward the parking lot together. I don't actually have a car, Daniel admitted. I take the bus. Oh, what about you? My apartment's nearby. Lucky. We stood awkwardly for a second. Then he looked at me. So, I waited. How badly do you hate me? I blinked. What? You look like you wanted to replace me after the first 15 minutes. I laughed before I could stop myself. An actual laugh. I wasn't thinking that. Liar. Maybe a little. He grinned. Fair enough. Then his bus arrived. He jogged toward it before turning around. I'll be less useless next week. I'm holding you to that. You probably should. The doors closed. And just like that, he was gone. That night, I worked on our shared lab report alone. Not because Daniel refused. Because he emailed me before dinner. Sorry, I have no idea how to write these reports. If you want, send me what to do and I'll fix whatever you tell me. I stared at the message. It wasn't laziness. He genuinely didn't know. I sighed, then replied, let's meet at the library tomorrow. His answer came less than a minute later. Seriously? You're willing to help? I frowned. That was a strange question. We have the same grade. Right. See you tomorrow. The university library was unusually quiet. Daniel showed up exactly on time. This surprised me. He carried 2 coffees. I guessed you drink black coffee. You guessed correctly. I knew it. How? You look like someone who drinks coffee because it's functional. I stared at him. Is that an insult? I'm not sure. Despite myself, I smiled. We spent almost 4 hours working. Or rather, I explained everything. He listened. Actually listened. Whenever I showed him how calculations worked, he'd stop me halfway. Wait. What? Explain that again. Most people pretended to understand. Daniel never did. If he didn't get something, he'd admit it immediately. There was something strangely refreshing about that. Around 6 in the evening, he leaned back in his chair. I owe you. You don't. I definitely do. You bought coffee. That covered maybe 15 minutes. I shrugged. It's fine. He watched me for a second. You do that a lot. What? Say everything's fine. I looked away. It usually is. He didn't argue. Instead, he opened his notebook again. So, he smiled. Teach me equilibrium one more time. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Daniel stopped making careless mistakes. Not because the material suddenly became easy, because he studied. A lot. Sometimes he'd text me at midnight. Is equation 3 supposed to be negative? Or, I think I finally understand buffers. Or, don't answer tonight. Just wanted to tell someone I got the calculations right. I'd wake up to those messages in the morning and find myself smiling. It was nice. Strange, but nice. By the fourth lab session, we had developed an unspoken rhythm. I prepared the equipment. Daniel checked measurements twice. I handled calculations. He organized samples. Without discussing it, we'd naturally divided every task. Professor Hayes stopped by our station halfway through the experiment. Looking much smoother. Daniel pointed at me. That's because Ellis is basically carrying me. Professor Hayes looked at me. Is that true? I answered before thinking. Not anymore. Daniel glanced over. It was only a second, but I noticed. He looked proud. After class, he caught up with me outside. Hey. Yeah. I wanted to say thanks. You've said that already. I know. This one's different. I slowed my pace. For what? For not treating me like I'm stupid. The words landed harder than I expected. I never thought you were. Most people do. I frowned. You ask questions. Exactly. So people assume I'm dumb. I looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't careless. He wasn't lazy. He just refused to pretend he understood things when he didn't. Somehow, that was rarer than being smart. You know, I said quietly. I'd rather work with someone who asks 10 questions than someone who fakes knowing everything. Daniel laughed. I think that's the nicest thing anyone said to me since I transferred. We reached the intersection where our paths separated. See you Thursday? You'll definitely see me Thursday. No coffee this time. He smiled. Depends. On what? If I pass tomorrow's quiz. I raised an eyebrow. And if you fail? I'll need even more coffee. I shook my head, laughing. For the first time since the semester began, I wasn't dreading lab anymore. I was actually looking forward to Thursday. By the middle of September, people had stopped seeing us as two separate students. We were simply Ellis and Daniel. If the professor had a question, he'd ask both of us. If another group needed help, they'd come to our station. If lab equipment disappeared, someone would inevitably ask, have Ellis and Daniel seen it? It felt strangely natural, like we'd always worked together. Tuesday afternoons slowly became our study afternoons. Neither of us officially suggested it. It just happened. One Tuesday turned into 2, then 3. Eventually, we didn't even ask anymore. Around 1 o'clock, Daniel would text. Library. I'd answer. Same table. He'd reply with a thumbs up. That was enough. One afternoon, I noticed him staring at me instead of his notes. What? You really rewrite everything. I looked down. Every lecture had been reorganized into color-coded summaries. I like structure. You rebuilt the professor's entire lecture. It helps me remember. Daniel laughed. I spent high school praying someone like you would sit next to me. I wouldn't have let you copy. I know. You would have learned instead. He smiled. Probably. Despite improving every week, Daniel still struggled with calculations. One afternoon, he groaned dramatically and dropped his pencil. I'm never going to understand this. You already understand most of it. I understand approximately 17%. 80. 20. 75. Fine. He smiled. 30. I rolled my eyes. You are impossible. I've been told. As the weeks passed, I started noticing little things about him. He always held doors open. He remembered every librarian's name. He thanked cafeteria workers every single time. He couldn't walk past a campus dog without smiling. Whenever someone dropped papers, he was already helping before anyone else reacted. None of those things were extraordinary. Together, they painted a picture. Daniel wasn't effortlessly charming. He was genuinely kind. One rainy afternoon, we ended up trapped inside the science building. The storm came out of nowhere. Sheets of rain covered the parking lot. Daniel looked outside. My bus isn't coming anytime soon. I live 15 minutes away. Lucky. I can give you an umbrella. You'll get soaked. I have another one. You carry 2 umbrellas? I shrugged. Prepared. He laughed. Of course you do. We waited nearly 40 minutes. The rain only got worse. Daniel checked the transit app. Delayed again. I looked outside. Want to wait at my apartment? He blinked. You sure? It's closer than standing here. I don't want to impose. You aren't. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay. My apartment wasn't impressive. Small, clean, almost painfully organized. Daniel stepped inside and looked around. I should have guessed. What? Everything has a place. It usually does. He pointed at my bookshelf. It's alphabetized. Yes. And those storage boxes? Color-coded. He laughed so hard he had to lean against the kitchen counter. I'm sorry. No, you're not. I'm really not. I made tea. Daniel wandered around looking at framed photos. Your parents. I nodded. My sister. You too close. Very. He smiled. You look alike. I've never heard that. You have the same smile. I smile. He looked at me. There. You just did. I hadn't even noticed. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then immediately sighed. Everything okay? My mom. Bad. No. He smiled weakly. Just a lot. You don't have to answer. I kind of do. He stepped onto the small balcony. I wasn't trying to listen, but apartments weren't exactly soundproof. I know, Mom. I'm studying. No, I'm eating. Yes. I promise. The conversation lasted almost 15 minutes. When he came back inside, he looked exhausted. Sorry. You don't have to apologize. She's worried. About. He shrugged. Everything. He sat quietly for a moment before speaking again. You know? I looked up. I didn't really want to transfer. I figured. I loved my old university. What changed? My dad got a job here. And my parents couldn't afford 2 apartments. So you moved? He nodded. I didn't really have a choice. There was no bitterness in his voice. Just acceptance. Somehow, that felt even sadder. The rain finally stopped after sunset. Daniel stood by the door pulling on his jacket. Thanks. For tea. For today. I smiled. It wasn't a big deal. It kind of was. He looked around the apartment once more. You know? What? I thought you were intimidating. I blinked. I was. First day. Why? You looked like someone who already had their entire life planned. I laughed quietly. I don't. You hide it well. I opened the door. So did you. He frowned. What do you mean? I thought you didn't care about anything. He stared at me, then started laughing. I've literally been panicking since orientation. Really, I just smile when I'm nervous. That explained a lot. Midterms arrived faster than either of us expected. Campus suddenly transformed overnight. Coffee cups everywhere. Students sleeping in study lounges. Library packed until midnight. Daniel looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. You okay? I've had 4 hours of sleep. Total. Last 2 nights. I sighed. That's not sustainable. I know. Our practical exam was scheduled for Friday morning. Thursday evening we stayed in the library until closing. Around 10:30 Daniel stared blankly at a page of calculations. I can't read anymore. Take a break. I don't have time. You won't remember anything like this. I have to pass. His voice came out sharper than intended. The silence that followed felt heavy. He immediately rubbed his forehead. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. He looked exhausted. I can't fail again. Again. I looked at him carefully. You failed something before transferring? He nodded without meeting my eyes. Organic chemistry. Oh, I had to repeat it. That doesn't make you a failure. I know, but it felt like one. I closed both our notebooks. We're done. We're not. We are. Ellis. No. He looked surprised. You need sleep. What if I forget everything? You won't. What if? You trust me? He looked at me for several seconds. Yeah. Then go home. He smiled tiredly. You're bossy. I've noticed. I kind of like it. The words slipped out so naturally that neither of us reacted immediately. Then Daniel blinked. I mean, I know what you meant. Good. Neither of us mentioned it again. But somehow, the walk to the bus stop felt different. Friday morning Daniel was already waiting outside the lab when I arrived. He held up 2 coffees. I slept. Good. 6 hours. Much better. He smiled. You were right. I usually am. Oh, I'm kidding. You absolutely weren't kidding. Maybe he was right. Because for the first time all semester, I wasn't just thinking about passing chemistry anymore. I was starting to wonder why seeing Daniel every Tuesday and Thursday had quietly become the best part of my week. Midterms changed everything. Not because our grades were bad. Quite the opposite. Daniel and I earned one of the highest practical scores in the class. When Professor Hayes handed back our evaluations, he stopped beside our station. Excellent teamwork. Daniel looked genuinely surprised. Seriously? Professor Hayes nodded. You two balance each other well. After he walked away, Daniel looked at me. I think that's the first time a professor has ever complimented me in chemistry. You earned it. You helped. We both did. He smiled. See? What? You still say we. The semester settled into a comfortable rhythm. Classes, labs, library, coffee. Sometimes we'd study. Sometimes we'd spend 2 hours talking instead. About professors. About movies. About families. About everything except whatever was quietly changing between us. Neither of us acknowledged it. Maybe because we didn't know what it was. One Tuesday, I arrived at the library to find Daniel already sitting at our usual table. Instead of textbooks, there was a paper bag. What's this? Lunch. I blinked. You bought me lunch. You always forget to eat. I do not. He raised an eyebrow. Ellis. Sometimes. You skipped lunch twice last week. You noticed? I notice a lot. Something about the way he said it made my heart beat just a little faster. We started spending time together outside studying. Not intentionally. It simply happened. One evening after lab, we walked downtown because neither of us wanted to go home yet. We ended up wandering through a small street market. Daniel stopped at nearly every stand. Look at this. He held up an old vinyl record. You don't even own a record player. I know. So why buy it? It has cool cover art. I laughed. That's terrible financial planning. It absolutely is. He put it back. But you're probably right. Another evening, we discovered a tiny bookstore near campus. Daniel disappeared into the fiction section. 20 minutes later, he emerged holding 3 novels. I thought you didn't read much. I didn't. And now? He shrugged. I started because you always do. You started reading? Because every time I looked up, you had a different book. I smiled despite myself. So now I blame you. I'll accept responsibility. October slowly painted the campus in shades of orange and gold. Students wore hoodies. Coffee lines got longer. The air became cooler. One afternoon, we studied outside under a large maple tree. Daniel leaned back on the grass. I forgot how nice autumn is here. You didn't have seasons before? Not like this. Leaves drifted around us. For a while, neither of us spoke. You ever think about after graduation? Daniel asked suddenly. Sometimes. You know what you want. I want graduate school. You'll get in. You sound confident. I am. What about you? He stared at the sky. I honestly have no idea. A week later, I learned something unexpected. Daniel had a part-time job. I only found out because I accidentally saw him stocking shelves at a grocery store near my apartment. He looked up in surprise. Ellis, I didn't know you worked here. He smiled sheepishly. Evenings. Since when? Since I transferred. Every evening? Most. Why didn't you tell me? He shrugged. It never came up. His shift ended an hour later. We walked toward the bus stop together. You must be exhausted. It's not that bad. You study all day. Yeah. Then work until almost 10. Mostly. When do you sleep? He laughed. Eventually. I wasn't laughing. You should have told me. Why? So I'd understand why you're always tired. Daniel looked down at the sidewalk. My parents help with tuition, but I wanted to cover everything else. Books, food, rent. I don't like asking them for more. There it was again. That quiet sense of responsibility he'd never talked about. The following Tuesday, I arrived at the library first. When Daniel walked in, I slid a coffee toward him. You didn't have to. I know. He sat down. I was going to buy yours. I got here first. He smiled. So this is war now. I prefer to think of it as strategy. He laughed. You're impossible. I've learned from you. By early November, people on campus had started making assumptions. Nothing rude. Just natural assumptions. One afternoon, another chemistry student approached our table. You guys coming to the science mixer Friday? Daniel looked at me. I wasn't planning to. The student grinned. You should bring your boyfriend. Silence. Just 1 second. Maybe 2. The student immediately looked embarrassed. Oh, I'm sorry. I just assumed. It's okay, Daniel said quickly. No worries. The student apologized again before walking away. Neither of us spoke. The library suddenly felt unusually quiet. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. People assumed things. Apparently. You okay? I looked back at my notebook. Yeah. You sure? Yeah. He nodded slowly. Neither of us mentioned it again. But concentration disappeared completely. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because someone assumed we were together. Because, for one tiny, ridiculous moment, the correction had almost disappointed me. I closed my textbook. stared at the ceiling, then immediately got annoyed with myself. Daniel was my friend, my lab partner, nothing else, right? Thursday's lab felt strangely awkward. Not dramatically, just different. Every time our hands reached for the same piece of equipment, we'd both pull back. Whenever one of us spoke, the other hesitated before answering. Even Professor Hayes noticed. "You two all right?" Daniel answered first. "Just tired." The professor accepted that explanation. I wasn't sure I did. After class, Daniel caught me outside. "Can we walk?" "Sure." We wandered across campus in silence for several minutes. Finally, he sighed. "I've been overthinking something." I looked over. "The library?" He nodded. "I didn't want things to get weird." "They aren't." "You sure?" "Mostly." He laughed quietly. "That's probably the most honest answer you've ever given me." "I try." He stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets. "For what it's worth." I waited. It didn't bother me. What? That someone thought we were together. My heart skipped. He kept walking, looking straight ahead. "I mean, we spend almost every day together. I guess people just assume." I nodded slowly. "Yeah." Another silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. When we reached the bus stop, Daniel looked at me with an uncertain smile. "See you Tuesday?" I smiled back. "You'll definitely see me Tuesday." He climbed onto the bus. As it pulled away, I realized something that made my stomach twist. For the first time since we'd met, I wasn't confused about why I looked forward to seeing Daniel. I knew exactly why. I just wasn't ready to admit it out loud. After that conversation at the bus stop, nothing changed. And somehow, everything did. Daniel was still Daniel. He still texted me every Tuesday morning. "Coffee?" I still answered. Already at the library. We still laughed. Still studied. Still worked through lab reports together. But now I noticed things I hadn't allowed myself to notice before. The way he smiled before he laughed. The way he always looked for me the moment he walked into a room. The way my day somehow became better the second I heard him say, "Hey, Ellis." It was becoming impossible to ignore. November arrived with colder mornings. Most students hurried across campus wearing scarves and thick jackets. Daniel never remembered gloves. "You forgot them again." I didn't forget. "You don't own any, do you?" He looked almost offended. "I own one glove." "One." "I lost the other." I laughed. That's somehow exactly what I expected. The following Tuesday, I walked into the library carrying a small paper bag. Daniel looked curious. "What's that?" I placed it on the table. "Open it." He reached inside. A pair of dark gray gloves. He stared at them. "You bought these. You clearly needed them." For several seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he looked up. "No one's bought me gloves before." His voice was quiet enough that I almost missed it. "It wasn't a big deal." "It kind of is." He carefully folded them back into the bag instead of putting them on immediately. "You don't have to save everything, Ellis." "I'm not trying to." His smile softened. "I think you are." A week later, Daniel proved he paid attention just as much. We finished lab late that afternoon. As we walked toward the parking lot, he suddenly stopped outside a small bookstore. "What? Come here." He disappeared inside for less than 5 minutes. When he came back out, he handed me a thin paperback. "You've been looking for this." I blinked. "How do you know that?" "You mentioned it." "When?" 3 weeks ago." I barely remember saying it. "You looked disappointed when the campus bookstore didn't have it." I stared at the book. "You remembered." He shrugged. "You remember everything about chemistry. I remember other things." The smile he gave me made it very difficult to remember how breathing worked. Our classmates had become used to seeing us together. Sometimes too used to it. One afternoon, we walked into the student center just as our classmate Maya waved us over. "There you are." Daniel looked around. "Who?" "You two. We've been looking everywhere." She pushed 2 chairs toward us. "I already saved your seats." Daniel sat beside me without thinking. "So what's going on?" "Group project assignments." She looked between us. "I'm assuming you're working together again." "We're partners." "I know." She smiled knowingly. "You practically live together already." Daniel laughed. "We definitely don't." Could have fooled me. Nobody thought much of the comment. Nobody except me. Because my brain immediately imagined what that would actually be like. I hated how easily the image appeared. That Friday evening, the science department hosted its annual mixer. Neither Daniel nor I wanted to go. Professor Hayes changed that. Attendance counts toward participation. Daniel sighed dramatically. I knew there was a catch. The event itself was surprisingly enjoyable. Faculty, graduate students, research posters, free food. Daniel immediately wandered toward the snack table. I knew you'd do that. What? You found food within 30 seconds. I work in a grocery store. He grabbed 2 plates. I'm professionally trained. We spent most of the evening talking to classmates. At one point, Professor Hayes introduced us to a graduate student working in biochemical research. So, she asked, smiling warmly, how long have you two been working together? Since the semester started, I answered. It shows. She looked between us. You communicate incredibly well. Daniel smiled. Ellis deserves most of the credit. I immediately shook my head. No, it's true. You've improved more than anyone else in class. Because you taught me. We taught each other. The graduate student laughed. I've never seen 2 lab partners argue over who deserves less credit. Later that evening, there was a small trivia competition. Teams of 4. Daniel and I ended up with Maya and another student named Chris. The chemistry questions were easy. The general knowledge questions, less so. What planet has the most moons? Everyone looked at Daniel. He blinked. Why are you looking at me? You always know random facts. I absolutely do not. You absolutely do. He sighed dramatically. Saturn. Chris checked the answer sheet. He's right. Daniel looked genuinely surprised. Huh. Maya pointed at him. I told you. By the end of the evening, almost everyone had gone home. The campus was unusually quiet. Cold air filled the empty walkways. Daniel shoved his hands into the gloves I'd bought him. I like these. I'm glad. They're warm. That was the idea. He smiled. I know. We took the longer route toward the bus stop. Neither of us seemed to be in a hurry. You know something? Daniel said. What? This has been my favorite semester. I looked over. Even after transferring? Especially after transferring. He kicked a small pile of leaves off the sidewalk. I thought starting over would be awful. And it would have been. He glanced at me. If I hadn't met you. I felt my heartbeat speed up. Daniel, I'm serious. He stopped walking. I don't think I ever thank you properly. You've thanked me 100 times. Not for this. For what? For making this place feel like home. The words settled somewhere deep inside me. I wanted to answer. I wanted to say something equally meaningful. Instead, I don't think it was just me. He smiled. Maybe. But you helped more than you know. The bus arrived. Daniel climbed onto the first step, then turned back around. Oh, what? I almost forgot. He reached into his backpack. Here. He handed me a folded piece of paper. What's this? Open it when you get home. Before I could ask another question, the doors closed. I unfolded the paper the moment I got back to my apartment. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't even a full page. Just a small handwritten note. Thanks for never making me feel like I was the new guy. Daniel. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. It was such a simple sentence. But somehow it stayed with me for the rest of the weekend. Because it made me realize something I had been trying very hard not to think about. Somewhere between our first disastrous lab, late-night study sessions, coffee, library afternoons, and quiet walks across campus, Daniel had quietly become the person I looked for first, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The note stayed inside my backpack for almost a week. Not because I kept forgetting to take it out, because every time I saw it, I smiled, which was becoming a problem. December arrived with freezing mornings and final projects. The chemistry lab suddenly became much louder. Everyone was stressed. Everyone was tired. Everyone wanted the semester to be over. Daniel leaned against our workstation while reading the assignment sheet. Our final project is worth 30%. I know. That's terrifying. It'll be fine. There you go again. What? It'll be fine. I looked at him. You always say that. I guess I do. You don't actually know it'll be fine. No. Then why say it? I thought about it. Because sometimes people just need to hear it. Daniel smiled. You definitely needed to hear it. The project required every pair to design and carry out their own experiment, which meant long afternoons in the lab, even longer evenings writing reports. One Friday, we stayed nearly 3 hours after everyone else had left. The building felt unusually quiet. Daniel carefully recorded measurements while I checked the final calculations. Done. Already. We're ahead of schedule. He leaned back on the stool. I never thought I'd hear those words. You've gotten faster. You've gotten less controlling. I looked up. Excuse me. He laughed. At the beginning of the semester, you checked every single thing I touched. I had reasons. You absolutely did. He smiled. But now you trust me. The realization caught me off guard. He was right. Without thinking about it, I'd stopped double-checking everything. Somewhere along the way, trust had quietly replaced caution. When we finally packed our bags, snow had started falling outside. The first snow of the year. Daniel stepped out of the science building and immediately looked up. It's snowing. It is. I forgot how much I missed this. Large flakes drifted through the yellow campus lights. Students stopped to take pictures. Someone nearby cheered. Daniel held out one hand. Snow collected on his glove before melting. You know? What? I've never actually built a snowman. I stared at him. Seriously? He nodded. My old town barely got snow. I laughed. You're 22. We're both over 21. And you've never built one? No. That's honestly impressive. I've had many talents. This wasn't one of them. Instead of walking straight toward the bus stop, we ended up in the nearly empty quad. Daniel crouched down. I have no idea what I'm doing. You make a snowball. Like this. Smaller. He rolled one across the ground. It immediately fell apart. I think I broke Winter. I couldn't stop laughing. You absolutely did. 10 minutes later, we had something that vaguely resembled a snowman. It leaned slightly to one side. Its head was too small. One stick was noticeably longer than the other. Daniel looked at it proudly. I think it has character. I think it needs structural support. You're impossible. I've heard that. He bumped my shoulder lightly with his. Looks good. It looks terrible. It looks happy. I looked at the crooked little snowman again. It kind of does. As we stood there, watching snow continue to fall around campus, Daniel quietly spoke. I'm glad you made me come out here. You were the one who wanted to build it. True. But if I were alone, he smiled to himself, I probably would have gone straight home. The campus around us had become almost silent. Snow absorbed every sound. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. My phone buzzed. My sister. I answered. Hey. Hi. You sound happy. I looked over at Daniel, who was trying to straighten our crooked snowman. I am. Oh. Long week. MHM. She didn't sound convinced. Who's with you? I hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second. My lab partner. The famous Daniel? I frowned. How do you know his name? You've mentioned him in every phone call for the last month. I froze. I have not. You absolutely have. Daniel looked over. Everything okay? I covered the microphone. Yeah. My sister laughed through the phone. I heard that. You are impossible. So are you. Her voice softened. I like hearing you laugh again. The words caught me completely off guard. What? You've sounded happier lately. I didn't know how to answer. After we hung up, I stood quietly for a moment. Daniel tilted his head. Everything all right? Yeah. What did she want? Nothing. I smiled without thinking. Just checking on me. Final presentations were only a week away. Stress levels on campus reached their peak. One afternoon, Daniel arrived at the library looking unusually quiet. You okay? He nodded automatically. Too quickly. Daniel. He sighed. My dad. What happened? He got laid off. I stared at him. When? This morning. I'm sorry. He rubbed both hands over his face. My parents told me not to worry. But you are. Of course I am. He looked down at the table. They already sacrificed so much so I could transfer. Now this. I closed my notebook. We're not studying today. We have to. No. He looked confused. We're taking a break. I don't have time. You need one. He laughed weakly. You really like making decisions for both of us. Sometimes. And somehow. He smiled tiredly. I'm usually glad you do. We walked to the small cafe across from campus. Neither of us talked much. Daniel stirred his hot chocolate absent-mindedly. I'm sorry. For what? I've been distracted. You don't have to apologize. I feel like I'm letting everyone down. You're not. My parents. School. You. I immediately shook my head. You could never let me down. The sentence came out before I could stop it. Daniel looked up. Really looked at me. The cafe suddenly felt much quieter than before. You mean that? It wasn't a question. Yeah. A slow smile appeared on his face. So do you? My heart skipped. What? You could never let me down either. Neither of us looked away. Not immediately. Something had shifted again. Not dramatically. Not enough to change anything overnight. But enough that both of us felt it. Enough that walking back to campus side by side, our shoulders brushed once. Neither of us moved away. And for the rest of the walk, the distance between us never quite returned. Final presentation week arrived faster than either of us wanted. The chemistry building was packed from morning until evening. Every lab station was occupied. Every student looked exhausted. Daniel walked into the lab carrying 2 coffees. "You know," he said, setting one beside me, "I think we've consumed enough caffeine this semester to violate several health guidelines." I smiled. "Probably. Worth it." I looked around our workstation. Our completed experiment. Our finished report. Months of work sitting neatly inside a single binder. "Yeah." He smiled back. "I think so too." Our presentation was scheduled for Thursday, second to last group, which meant 3 days of waiting. 3 days of watching everyone else present first. Daniel hated waiting. "I'd rather just get it over with." "I know. What if I forget everything?" "You won't." "What if?" "Daniel." He laughed. "I know. It'll be fine." I nodded. "It'll be fine." Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. I found Daniel already standing outside the lab. He looked calm. Too calm. "You nervous?" "No." "Liar." He laughed quietly. "Maybe a little." "A little." "A lot." "That's more believable." The presentations went by one after another. Every time a group finished, Daniel became quieter. By the time our names were called, he stopped smiling altogether. Professor Hayes looked up. "Ellis Carter." "Daniel Brooks. You may begin." The first few minutes went exactly as we'd rehearsed. I explained the methodology. Daniel described the data collection. We alternated naturally. Months of working together made it feel effortless. Then came the questions. One professor pointed toward one of our graphs. "Can you explain this result?" Daniel answered immediately. "Clear, confident, accurate." Another faculty member asked about possible sources of error. Again, Daniel answered before I could. Not because I couldn't, because he genuinely knew. I found myself smiling while he spoke. Back in September, he'd introduced himself by saying he was terrible at chemistry. Now, he was explaining complex experimental results to faculty without looking at his notes once. After the final question, Professor Hayes nodded. "Excellent work." Another professor added, "Very well-balanced presentation." As we walked back to our seats, Daniel leaned closer. I didn't panic. "You didn't." "I actually knew the answers." "You did." He let out a quiet laugh. "I can't believe that." "I can." When class ended, students slowly filtered out of the building. Daniel and I stayed behind to finish cleaning our station one last time. Neither of us seemed eager to leave. Professor Hayes approached while we packed our bags. "I wanted to congratulate both of you." "Thank you," I said. He smiled. "I've watched a lot of lab partnerships over the years." Daniel looked curious. "And you two learned something more important than chemistry." We both waited. "You learned how to trust each other." With that, he walked away. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, Daniel laughed softly. "I think he's right." "So do I." Outside, the campus looked different. Not physically, emotionally. Students were celebrating, taking pictures, talking about winter break. The semester was ending. Daniel shoved his hands into his coat pockets. So, we're done." I looked toward the science building. "It doesn't feel real." "No, it doesn't." We wandered across campus without deciding where we were going. Eventually, we ended up outside the library. Our library. The table by the window was visible through the glass. Daniel smiled. "Remember the first time we studied there? You apologized every 10 minutes." "I did. You kept saying you were slowing me down." He laughed. "I was." "You weren't." "I definitely was." "You really weren't." We went inside anyway. Not to study. Just to sit. Everything felt strangely familiar. The librarian waved when she saw us. "Finished." Daniel smiled. "Finally." She laughed. "I was wondering when I'd stop seeing you two every afternoon." I looked at Daniel. So was I. The silence between us felt comfortable, until Daniel quietly asked, "What are you doing over break?" "Going home for a few days." "You?" "Staying here." I looked over. "You're not visiting your parents?" He shook his head. "Money's tight right now." "Oh, I'll work extra shifts." The word sat heavily between us. A few minutes later, Daniel closed his notebook. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You can say no." "Okay." He looked unusually nervous. Nervous enough that he wasn't looking at me. "What's up?" He took a slow breath. "When we come back next semester." "Yeah. We won't have chemistry lab anymore." I nodded. "I know. No more Tuesday afternoons. No Thursday labs. No excuse to spend 4 days a week together." His voice was almost too quiet to hear. My chest tightened. "I've been thinking about that too." You have. More than I probably should. He smiled sadly. I don't really want this to end. The words hung between us. Neither of us pretended not to understand what he meant, because it wasn't really about chemistry anymore. We left the library just before sunset. Snow covered the sidewalks. Students hurried past carrying suitcases. Campus was slowly emptying. Daniel stopped near the same bus stop where we'd stood so many times before. I need to tell you something. My heartbeat immediately sped up. What? He looked down for a moment, then back at me. When I transferred here, I thought I'd spend one lonely semester. I honestly expected to keep my head down, pass my classes, go to work, and start over somewhere else after graduation. He smiled softly. Then I got assigned the same lab partner for the entire semester. I couldn't help laughing. You make it sound like a life-changing event. It was. He looked directly into my eyes. You became my favorite part of college. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Every sound around us seemed to disappear. Only Daniel remained, waiting, not looking away. And for the first time all semester, I realized he wasn't the only one about to say something that could change everything. I looked at him, really looked at him. Snow drifted quietly between us, settling on the shoulders of his coat. The bus stop was almost empty now, most students already gone for winter break. Cars rolled past in the distance, but everything around us felt strangely still. Daniel didn't say anything else. He'd already said enough. You became my favorite part of college. I could have answered immediately. I wanted to. Instead, I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because I suddenly realized how much time I'd spent trying to hide something that had become obvious weeks ago. Daniel frowned. Was that the wrong thing to say? No. Then why are you laughing? I shook my head. Because I've been trying to convince myself this wasn't happening. What wasn't? I smiled. This. He stared at me. What do you mean? I took a slow breath. You remember when someone at the library thought we were dating? He nodded carefully. I couldn't stop thinking about it afterward. His expression changed. Just a little. And when you gave me that note, I continued. I kept it. You kept it. In my backpack. For weeks. Daniel blinked. You still have it. I reached into my notebook pocket. The folded paper was slightly worn around the edges now. I handed it back to him. His eyes widened. You actually carried this around? I guess I did. He looked down at the note before folding it again. I didn't think it meant that much. It did. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel laughed quietly. I've been an idiot. Why? I thought you were just being nice. I was. He smiled. Only nice. I looked down at the snow. I thought the same thing. He shook his head. We're really bad at this. We're chemistry students. Exactly. We can explain molecular interactions, but not our own feelings. That made both of us laugh. Daniel stuffed his hands back into the gray gloves. I need to ask you something. Okay. If I asked whether you'd want to keep seeing me next semester. I raised an eyebrow. We're already seeing each other. You know what I mean. I do. He smiled nervously. I've never been particularly smooth. I noticed. Thanks. You asked. I did. He took another breath. I don't want us to stop just because the class is over. I stepped a little closer. I don't either. His eyes searched mine. So, would you maybe want to go out with me? There it was. Simple. Honest. No dramatic speech. No rehearsed confession. Just Daniel. Exactly the way he'd always been. I smiled before answering. I thought you'd never ask. For 1 second he simply stared. Really? Really? His shoulders relaxed so completely that I realized he'd been holding his breath. I spent 2 weeks trying to figure out how to say that. You could have started with coffee. He laughed. I've been starting with coffee since September. That's true. I figured I'd keep the tradition. Neither of us moved. Neither of us rushed the moment. Daniel looked almost amused. So, we're doing this. I think we are. I should probably warn you. What? I still ask way too many questions. I know. I still lose gloves. I bought you new ones. I still panic before exams. I've noticed. He smiled. And you're still going to color code everything. I absolutely am. I was hoping you would. The bus arrived. Neither of us stepped forward. The driver opened the doors and waited. Daniel looked at me. I'm not taking this one. You sure? Pretty sure. The doors closed again. The bus pulled away without him. He watched it disappear before looking back at me. I think this is the first bus I've ever intentionally missed. Worth it. He smiled. Definitely. We walked toward my apartment instead. Not because we'd planned anything, just because neither of us wanted the evening to end yet. The streets were quiet beneath fresh snow. Campus lights glowed behind us. You know something? Daniel said. What? When Professor Hayes paired us together. You thought your semester was ruined? He laughed. Honestly, yeah. I figured you'd hate working with me. I almost did. Ouch. The first day only. Fair. What about you? He smiled. I thought you were intimidating. I remember. I was completely wrong. Were you? Yeah. You were never intimidating. You were just scared. I looked over at him. You figured that out? A long time ago. When we reached my apartment building, we stopped outside the entrance. Snow continued falling around us. Daniel looked up. So, this is usually where one of us says, see you Tuesday. I smiled. We don't have Tuesday lab anymore. No, we don't. A comfortable silence settled between us. Then Daniel said, I still want Tuesdays. I looked at him. And Thursdays. And random Saturdays. And bookstore visits. And library afternoons, even if we don't actually study. I couldn't stop smiling. I think we can arrange that. I was hoping you'd say that. Winter break passed more quickly than either of us expected. Daniel worked extra shifts. I visited my family for a few days. But unlike the beginning of the semester, we talked every single day, sometimes only a few messages, sometimes long phone calls that somehow stretched past midnight. It never felt forced. It just fit. When January arrived, campus slowly filled with students again. I walked into the student center carrying 2 coffees. Out of habit, Daniel spotted me almost immediately. There you are. There you are. He walked over, smiling. So, no chemistry lab today. No. But, he accepted the coffee. I figured we could still keep our Tuesday tradition. I laughed. I was thinking exactly the same thing. We headed toward the library together, past the science building where we'd met, past the quad where we'd built the world's worst snowman, past the bookstore where he'd found the novel I'd wanted. Everything looked familiar, but somehow different. Not because the campus had changed, because we had. A few weeks later, Professor Hayes passed us outside the library. He stopped for a moment. No lab this semester. No, Professor. He looked at the 2 coffees in our hands, then at the library behind us. A knowing smile appeared on his face. I see the partnership survived. Daniel looked at me before answering. It turns out. He smiled. It was never really about chemistry. Professor Hayes chuckled. I suspected as much. He wished us luck and continued across campus. Daniel watched him disappear. You think he knew? I think he figured it out before we did. Probably. Sometimes I think back to the first day of the semester. To the guy who walked into the lab late with a cup of coffee, smiling like nothing could possibly go wrong. And to the version of me who silently wished for a different partner. If someone had told me then that the same lab partner I'd spend every Tuesday and Thursday with would become the person I couldn't imagine college without, I would have laughed. Instead, one assignment changed an entire semester. A semester became a friendship. That friendship quietly became something more. And every Tuesday after that, even without chemistry, we still met at the same library table. Because some routines begin as class requirements. The best ones become choices. Spring arrived before either of us noticed. Somehow, our Tuesday tradition survived. Then Wednesday dinners appeared without anyone suggesting them. Friday coffee became normal. Weekend bookstore trips stopped needing to be planned. Somewhere along the way, spending time together stopped feeling like arranging schedules. It simply became life. One afternoon in March, I walked into the library carrying 2 coffees. Daniel was already there, exactly where he'd been every Tuesday since September. He looked up and smiled. There you are. There you are. He accepted the coffee before sliding one of my textbooks toward me. I started reading chapter 6. I stared at him. Before I got here? I know. He looked almost proud of himself. I've changed. You have. No panic. No last-minute cramming. No pretending I understand things. I laughed. I'm proud of you. His smile softened. I know. People still assumed we were together. Now, they were right. The funny part was that almost nobody seemed surprised. One afternoon, Maya walked past us in the student center. She looked at our coffees, then at the way Daniel absent-mindedly straightened the sleeve of my hoodie before sitting down. She folded her arms. So, Daniel smiled. So, you 2 finally figured it out? I looked at him. He looked at me. Then we both laughed. Were we that obvious? Daniel asked. Maya blinked. You've been obvious since October. October. She looked genuinely confused. You honestly didn't know? No. She shook her head dramatically. I've never seen two smarter people be so completely clueless. Even Professor Hayes noticed. Near the end of the semester, he stopped us outside the chemistry building. I have a question. Daniel looked nervous. Did we forget something? Professor Hayes smiled. No. He looked between us. So, still meeting every Tuesday? Daniel answered first. Every Tuesday. And Thursdays. And usually Saturdays. Professor Hayes laughed. I suspected as much. I smiled. You knew? The day you two stopped checking each other's work. Daniel frowned. What does that have to do with anything? You trusted each other. The professor adjusted the stack of papers in his arms. The chemistry was just an excuse. Then he continued toward his office. Daniel watched him disappear. I think he understood us before we understood ourselves. I think you're right. Near the end of spring semester, the university held an awards ceremony for the science department. Neither of us expected anything. Professor Hayes did. When our names were called, Daniel looked completely confused. For outstanding collaborative research, Ellis Carter and Daniel Brooks. We walked to the front together, accepted the certificate, posed for one awkward photograph. As we stepped off the stage, Daniel whispered, "This should probably be yours." I smiled. "No, ours." He laughed quietly. "You still say we." "I always will." That evening we ended up back in the chemistry lab. It was empty. The same room where we'd met months earlier. Our old workstation stood exactly where it always had. Daniel rested one hand on the edge of the counter. "Remember the first day? You almost mixed the wrong chemicals." "I absolutely did." "You told me you were terrible at chemistry." "I believed it." "You were wrong." He looked around the room. "I wasn't actually afraid of chemistry." "No. I was afraid of starting over." I leaned against the neighboring bench. "I know. You made that easier." "You made it easier too." He smiled. "I guess we saved each other a little." I thought about everything that had happened. The library, the coffee, the snowman that leaned sideways, the handwritten note, the bus he intentionally missed, the first Tuesday that wasn't required anymore. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think we did." Sometimes people ask how we met. They expect some dramatic story, a chance encounter, a big romantic moment, something unforgettable. Instead, I usually smile and tell them the truth. I got assigned the same lab partner for the entire semester. Most people laugh, because it sounds ordinary. Honestly, I thought so too, until one random assignment turned into the best friendship I'd ever had. That friendship slowly became love. Not all at once. Not because of one perfect moment, but because every Tuesday led to another Tuesday. Every conversation made the next one easier. Every small act of kindness quietly became something impossible to imagine living without. Looking back now, I don't remember every experiment we ran, or every formula we memorized. Most of those faded with time. What stayed with me was something much simpler. The guy who showed up late on the first day carrying a cup of coffee. The guy I was convinced would ruin my semester. The guy who, without either of us realizing it, became the person I wanted beside me long after chemistry was over. Funny how life works. Sometimes the best thing that ever happens to you is sitting down next to the one person you never would have chosen yourself.